Good morning. This is the Blaine's World podcast where conversations are worth hearing and seeing. You can watch us each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also listen in on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And for more information and past episodes, you can visit my website, which is behind me, blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, coming to you in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. Each week, we share positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce Michel Neray. I don't
You got
quite,
it.
okay, close enough, thank you. Who's a speaker, storyteller, and songwriter, being my guest today. And Michel, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends watching you on YouTube and Facebook. That's Michel. And I should mention that Michel Neray, hopefully that's close enough, has spent 30 plus years at the intersection of story, strategy, and stage as keynote speaker, messaging strategist, advertising writer, live events producer, and recording artist. And so, Michel, the first question I always ask when I meet somebody on board for the first time is, as a kid, you grew up where?
I grew up in Montreal.
Okay. As a kid growing up in Montreal, did you always know you wanted to be a storyteller?
No, no, actually, but I looked at some of the earliest things that I've written for myself, and I was constantly reminded that I always wanted to be an inventor. And so storytelling is all about inventing,
Sure.
but the way I use storytelling is partly to invent something new, but partly to uncover the truth of what is.
Okay. And so in inventing stuff, did you ever invent something as well? Not other than a story.
I invented lots of trouble for my parents.
Okay. And you were always coming up with these stories. Do you remember the very first story you ever came up with?
No, honestly, I only got into consciously. I only got into storytelling in my professional years when I was an advertising writer. So I'm going back like the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. And it wasn't until the early 2000s that I became a true student of storytelling. And earlier, I'll tell you why. I mean, briefly, um, I have a chemistry degree from University of Waterloo. My lab results were never really all that great, so I had to invent good stories to explain them away. And there's more than a grain of truth to that. Uh, and then I went and I got my MBA, and I've always had this dichotomy about left brain, right brain, rational, creative, etc., logical, lateral thinking, and creative thinking all over the place. And I decided that advertising was a good place for me. I joined on the account management side. I soon became a copywriter, advertising writer, marketing writer. I've written everything: TV commercials, radio commercials, billboard ads, um, long copy, short copy, and when the internet came along, internet copy and home pages and sell page, you name it. I've written it. Um, but I was always the one kind of like, even though when I was a copywriter, the job of liaising with the client lies with the account people. But I always found a way to weasel my way and say, no, I've got to interview the clients myself. And what I discovered was that um, the more I drilled down with my clients about what made them unique and you know because everybody, the first question is, I'll just give you the value proposition. Well,
Right.
the value proposition is just it's just a bunch of marketing fluff that everybody expects and nobody believes, and it's too generic anyway. I was looking for stuff that you could really dig, or I could really dig my teeth into as a writer, find out what really makes this click, this company, this product, this service, whatever it is. And what I found out was that it was never a big thing, because the big things are all taken. The big things are
Right.
non-differentiating, right? Everybody's got the big things covered. But it's the little things that make a company or product or service unique and interesting and different. It's the little things, and nobody thinks of digging in that deep. And when you go even deeper and you ask, well, this is how you do things, and maybe it's how you run a company, maybe it's how you manage your human resources, maybe it's how you do logistics, maybe it's how, but it's always a how you do something is what makes you different. But even you dig even deeper than this, I'm going back 30 years, right? That like I no, but I know storytelling is like a buzzword these
Right.
days, but I realized very early on says so if you dig a little deeper beyond the how we do things and you get to why, but not the Simon Sinek why we do things. It's why we do how we do what we do.
Now, let me ask you, do you still do any of the advertising stuff?
In a different way. But I'll get to that. I'll get because I'm getting yeah. So the why we do, how we do, what we do, there's always a story. And so I realized that story was fundamental to a company's unique differentiation. And as an advertising writer, I quickly learned that story was the best way, the most convincing way to communicate that difference. So I could claim something, and your first response would be, yeah, show me.
Right.
Or I could tell you a story about it, not tell you what it's about, but I could tell you the story, and you'll be thinking, oh, wow, yeah, yeah, you know what? That's my problem too. I always wondered about that. Yeah, hey, maybe I should try that. I've never seen any other product, service, or whatever that does it this way. This is cool. Story, it gets past the the Bayesian wall of logic that we've built up in our minds that form our beliefs about the world. Story is so I started getting into story in the early 2000s.
The other advantage also, Michelle, listening to you, is that it's certainly a lot more interesting to hear somebody's story than just a factual basis of what they do or what the product does, you know.
I mean, now listen. Now I'm going to say things that other people say, but we're going back to the late 1990s, early 2000. Nobody was talking about storytelling back.
Sure.
But I realized that stories are how human beings have communicated, how influenced, changed people's belief, affected change. Anthropologists now believe that the very act of storytelling is what has allowed us to be at the one of the things that has allowed us to be at the top of the food chain. It's crucial to our survival as a species because we communicate so much through story, and we remember it. And evolution wise, I'm a professional speaker. I'll look that up later. Uh, it's evolution has realized that this is a pretty important piece. So they reward us for sharing and listening to stories by giving us a hit of dopamine, by having our brains releasing oxytocin. Oxytocin, the feel good drug, the hug drug, the love drug. What bonds mothers and babies. When we shake hands, when we hug, when we kiss, it's anything. We release oxytocin, and also when we listen to and share stories. That's how fundamental it is to the human experience, and we've ignored it for hundreds of years. Anyway, yeah.
So fast forward, if you would, Michelle, then from the fact that you were in your advertising background to all of a sudden then you start getting more into storytelling as opposed to advertising. What was the transition like, or how did you get into quote storytelling as opposed to doing advertising?
So I never really got out of of advertising, even though I still do it in ways related to it, because I get hired to help companies uncover or dig down to their core what I call their essential message, their core message. That's a very specialized form of advertising. So
Sure.
I don't write posters anymore and TV commercials, but I'll write their core manifesto through story. So that's about as good as a complete merge between storytelling and advertising, and then that dictates everything. The brand personality, the unique differentiation of the company, of the product or service, whatever it is. So, and I started doing that in the early 2000s. Then I started, because also because I'm an entrepreneur as well, we were one of the first marketing companies to embrace the World Wide Web. We were building websites. I was building websites in the early 1990s, pretty incredibly. And, uh, and because of that, I started to get invited to speak at conferences. And apparently I was pretty good at it. People liked me. I got invited back, and when I asked them, why do you like what I do, what I talk about, and they say it's because you share a lot of stories through your speaking. I said, oh, okay, I didn't know that. I didn't realize that, uh, and but makes sense, right? So then I started really using storytelling, crafting stories, understanding what I did to craft a story to make it more impactful, more streamlined, and all this stuff. And then I started teaching storytelling. And then I realized, and then in 2012, I thought, as a professional speaker, I breathe pretty rarefied air. I go to conferences around the world. I've spoken in, 12 different countries. I hear other phenomenal speakers. I listen to their stories. But most people don't have that experience. So I decided to launch something called Mo Mondays. And Mo Mondays was kind of, think of it as the democratization of storytelling. I invited both professional speakers and non-professional speakers to share their story on stage, and realized just how powerful an experience it is both for the listener and the speaker. And did that for a number of years. I've recently relaunched it. We could talk about that later in a totally different way, or marginal or somewhat different way. Uh, but what I realized in that phase of, and it was never instead of, I always added to whatever I was doing, which is why it's so hard for me to put a concise bio together. But what I realized was that storytelling, authentic storytelling, and again, I'm going to say this now, I'm not the only one who does this, but back then in 2012, the closest thing was the moth. In the US, we didn't even have the moth in Canada. And people would say, oh, you like the moth? And I said, what's that? But yeah, it was similar idea. What I found was that the process of crafting and developing your own story, which is kind of like, think of it as your origin story, just like superheroes have an origin story, is about the most therapeutic thing you could do for yourself. You could think you know your story, but it's not until you craft it and share it 100 times that you really gain the benefit of understanding yourself, of making your sense of who you are in the context of the world through your
Now,
story.
now, let me go out on a limb here, but I'll take a guess and say that in terms of your storytelling, sometimes you might bring in a guitar or two. Does that come in, it all involved in it?
Yeah, that happened. Now, that again, that came later, and I just started because of all of what I've been exposed to through Mo Mondays and my own personal life, and I said I was just so inspired, and basically taught myself to play guitar late in life, and now I have 2 albums on Spotify, Apple, and all the platforms, and and not surprisingly, a lot of the songs are story songs.
Okay, so when you speak, you oftentimes bring in a guitar with you and sing a song.
Sometimes, if it's appropriate, yeah, for sure.
So how many guitars do you have?
Oh, do you want to know the real number or the number that I tell my wife?
What between the two, what's the number?
I don't know. I don't have that many. In fact, I think I want to sell three of them because I want to buy a really expensive one.
You know,
Uh, but I've got around 10 or 12.
Michel, your story, I'm laughing because it reminds me of an artist I recently spoke to who's a photographer, and he had the same comment about how many cameras does he have, and it's interesting. He's a fascinating guy. He's a dentist, and he practices dentistry so he can go out, buy cameras, So I'm not surprised you have a bunch of guitars behind you, but that's how he got into it.
I have some on this side and I have some on the other side of the camera too.
Well, it's a great collection, and what's so cool about it, you just learned this by yourself?
No, well, I studied with some masters.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or apropos to storytelling, I guess another way you can learn it is on YouTube or watching people as well. And I guess people can learn storytelling. That's one way people can learn, or can they learn storytelling by watching a YouTube video?
Yeah, you can. Uh, yeah, you sure can. And there are some good courses in on storytelling, but uh, and it's a very important but. Um, at some point, uh, something like hero's journey comes up. Everybody teaches hero's journey. And hero's journey is great if you've got 1.5 to 2 hours and a multi-million budget to do matching animation. Uh, uh, but unless you're doing it for that, it's not exactly all that appropriate. So knowing what style of storytelling, how to strip it down to its basics so that I could tell a story in 3, 4 minutes. I would never say, and now, Blaine, I'm going to share a story. But it's part of the conversation. It just slips out as part of the conversation. You don't even realize I'm telling you a story. It just happens to fit, and but it has some of the core structure: beginning, middle, end. Some challenge that is thrown at me or the main character in the story, and how they get out of it. That's the essence of a story.
I'm so sorry I missed you. You recently were in Asheville, right?
I
You
was,
go to
yes.
Asheville. And what's interesting about Asheville, it's become kind of a storytelling, I don't want to say capital, but it's very, very popular in Asheville. They have one facility, I don't know if you're familiar with Story Parlor, and it's just a facility for people to tell stories. When you were in Asheville, did you do any storytelling?
I did not because we were all tied up with the family and going to guitar stores.
Okay. But anyway, so it's just interesting how,
But I know that when we're driving down, I can't remember which highway it is. As we're driving from north down, I and it's north of Asheville. I guess around 30, 40 minutes. We pass this tourist sign that says Storyville Theater or something like that.
probably Johnson City, Tennessee.
Yeah, could be. Could
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
that's story capital, but it's sort of come down from Tennessee to Asheville, and a lot of places now teach it, tell stories, become very, very popular in this area just within the last 10 years, maybe, or something.
Amazing. Yeah,
It's
I'd love to do a Mo Mondays there. Well, probably now shout out to Edie Weinstein because she was the one who brought who she spoke at Mo Mondays Philadelphia back in 2012. She was really helpful and instrumental in helping us bring Mo Mondays back to Philadelphia in 2025. She was helpful in connecting you and I together, you and me together, and so yeah, so she probably knows somebody else in Asheville who
Well, it
would
seems
do.
like you know people everywhere, but yeah, let's keep that in mind because if and when you ever come down to Asheville again, I'd love to help, put on a similar event.
Well, I'll I'll double that because that relies on me setting up the event. But I'll tell you what, if you help set up the event, I'm coming down.
Okay,
I'll
well,
host it.
we'll talk about it, or I'll get up to Toronto, which isn't likely. But talk then a little bit, Michelle. So you've gotten into this whole storytelling thing. Where's it going to go? In other words, what's your eventual goal? You mentioned, let's talk a little bit. You started a Substack. Is that correct?
Yep,
Where is it? To share your stories, or what's the purpose of that?
so I wanted to let me back up a little bit because or else it won't make any sense. But every Sunday night, except the odd one, I sit down at my computer and I think about the week, and I call this my glimmers and gratitudes writing. It's kind of like a journal. It's thinking about over the past week, thinking, uh, can I name three things that was either a glimmer or a gratitude? Gratitude, great, just great, practicing, gratefulness. Uh, or a glimmer of something, a beautiful sunrise, a flower, or a scent, so anything that just made me feel, oh man, this is reminds me of how wonderful it is to be human, kind of thing. And I would write these things. Most of the time, I'd get three. Sometimes I'd run off at the mouth and get 5 or 10 or whatever. Some days I'd sit down and I'd struggle to get one, and then after the first one, I'd have 8 more. But then the next step is really okay, and I use AI to help me brainstorm the pattern between them all. Like what links all of these things together, and how do I feel about them? And then I would challenge myself to come up with the wisdom of the week. And I was doing this for several months, and I thought, there's a story here. I Maybe it should be a newsletter. Maybe it should be something that I publish, but I don't want it to be a marketing piece. I don't want it. It's not to sell anybody. It's just to help people pause the way I do and draw some wisdom out of our lives together. And so I started doing that a couple of months ago. I put out 3 issues already on Substack, and yeah, Substack. And I don't even know what my URL on Substack is. So let me find that here. I should know that off the top of my head. That shows you how. Here, hang on. Substack. And it's going to, substack.com at Michel Neray, all one word. MichelNeray.
And
Substack.
what's cool about that, Michelle, and I like what you did, is one of the stupid things I think Instagram does is people have other names. You can't find anybody on Instagram if they don't use their own name. So the Substack, I can find you, and that's where you're available. And so you're now doing what with Substack? You're publishing something weekly, monthly. How often do you publish it?
The original plan was to publish it once every 2 weeks. I'm averaging once every 3 weeks.
Okay. And what are you writing there?
That on Substack,
Yeah.
I'm literally publishing my glimmers and gratitudes writing of every 3 weeks I say, well, this one is particularly good, and it's worth crafting and working on beyond the draft stage.
By the way, I love the title too. Is that what you call it? What do you call it? Glitter? What do you call
Glimmers and gratitudes.
I love it. Like I said, I was going to say I love Wisdom of the Week, but Glimmers and Gratitudes has kind of a nice ring to it as opposed to, Wisdom of the Week. So Glimmers, I'm putting this down, Glimmers and Gratitudes. And so in terms of writing it, what's your style? Are you kind of a guy, you get up at 7 o'clock in the morning and write for 3 hours, or what's your writing process?
What time?
Go ahead. How do you write?
Oh,
I mean, what's your process?
my process is so. It's funny. People ask me my process for songwriting too, and it's almost the opposite of this. So I'll share both of them with you. But this is I will start writing, literally listing my glimmers and gratitudes of the week, and then I'll start writing them into my, my word processor, and or a Google Doc, and then I'll look at them and I'll say, well, what kind of links all of these things together? And the more I write about that, the more a fundamental truth emerges from it. And then I will restart writing it, but with that in mind. And in fact, I think this is going to be my next newsletter. It says, we don't write to share the truth. We write to discover it. And I truly believe it's only through writing that we force ourselves to make connections about what we're writing. That it's just like, when you write a song, every songwriter knows this. The song you sit down to write is rarely the song you wrote. It changes because through the act of writing, you deepen your understanding of what you're writing about, and you clarify. And you clarify because you strip away all that garbage that just fluff and words and extra words. And, if anybody's who ever had struggled writing a newsletter, 9 times out of 10, it's because they're trying to squeeze too many ideas into one piece.
You'll see, you'll be in my next blog, and it's funny you said that because that's one of the problems I have. I have so many ideas I want to put into it, and you'll take a look at it. But by the way, as I told you off the air, I think will be a great book for you. Glimmers and Gratitude, great title, Glimmers and Gratitudes, and you put all these together in just one final compilation. That'll be your next book down the road.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, at averaging one every 3 weeks, maybe I'll have enough after 2 years. But
You
you asked
mentioned
me about 7 a.m. and
yeah.
I usually start writing this at around 9:30 or 10 in the evening on a Sunday. And once I'm in it, I cannot stop. So it's not unusual for me to finish at 1 or 2 in the morning. And I just keep going.
And I was interested in what you just said too about songwriting. So how is that different than the writing process?
So songwriting is different because, listen, there are as many different styles of songwriting as there are songwriters. So, because my background is as an advertising writer, I tend to think in terms of headlines and slogans and taglines. So, very often I'll have an idea of something that I'm going through, uh, and I'll turn it into a slogan, or in songwriting terms, I'll turn it into the hook. So a lot of songwriters, the hook is the last thing that they struggle with. For me, it's the first thing that I'll do. I almost can't write a song unless I've got the hook first. The hook is the repeatable phrase. It's the chorus. It's a core idea. It may usually in the chorus, but it may be the bridge. It's the key phrase that people will remember the song by. Maybe it's the opening line of the song that gets repeated again, or it's the last line of every verse. There are different styles of doing that. But the hook is usually what comes to me first because that's who I am. But other songwriters will write a melody and then try to fit words to it. And to me, I say, how do you do that?
So how many songs have you written?
Oh, if you include the finished and unfinished ones, they'd be in the hundreds, in the low hundreds.
Now I always wondered about the song, even in your Substack piece. Does that evolve over time? In other words, you write a song 10 years ago, and then has it changed 10 years later? Does that ever happen?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's like, and is writing ever finished? This deciding when a piece of writing is finished is one of the toughest things. You know, because it's never perfect. I listen to some of my old songs and say, oh, yeah, I wish I, emphasized the second syllable on that word, you know, instead of the third syllable, or now I hear when I perform things live, I say, oh, I just did it differently than we did it on the record, and I like it better. And who knows, maybe 10 years I'll go back. I don't know.
So if people want to listen to your music, how do they do that?
Oh, very, very easy. Um, we live in a world where free music is ubiquitous. So any platform, any streaming platform, you can listen to it. And it's my name, Michel Neray. Or you go to my website. I'm on Bandcamp where people can purchase downloadable songs, and or they could come uh, invite me to do a house concert at their house, which somebody just did last week, and or they could come to Toronto where I gig pretty regularly.
Any of your stuff on YouTube?
Oh yeah, I'm on YouTube.
Okay, so we'll look for you there too. Michelle, one of the interesting things I'm finding out about you is that you seem to do about 27 different things, you
Yeah.
know. That's sort of always been my life. But out of all the different things you do have a favorite.
I don't have a favorite, but I can tell you that the 27 things I do on the surface may feel very different, but they all come from a very, very core part of me. And that is, it always comes down to some essential truth. How I express it could be in a newsletter, could be in a song, could be in a keynote speech, could be in a workshop. It could be coaching someone else in the art and craft of storytelling for the purpose of helping them arrive at their core message.
So I say that because that's one of the reasons I came up with Blaine's World to describe what I do, because that gave me the flexibility to say I do a lot of different things all under the umbrella, because it used to be hard, Michelle, trying to explain what I do. I was a college professor, I did this, I did that, but it was confusing. So you just lump it under Michel Neray, and it's all there. What do you see yourself in terms of if I met you 5 years down the road from here? Is there any great thing you see yourself wanting to do 5 years from now?
I think about that a lot. And there's always one more thing I want to do. Uh, do you hear the dogs?
Yeah, that's what you'll hear mine as well. Go ahead.
We live in a real house, a real house. Um, I don't know. I don't know. I try not to think. I think about it a lot, and I try not to think about it because, my best. It's just amazing what happens when you just do stuff. Uh,
No, it's funny you say that.
oh, very funny. I just, this just happens to be on my desk. It's a story that I wrote, I'd say 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And what you're asking me is this, you know, realizing all the best things I've ever done in my life, I've done them just because I wanted to. No other reason than that. First day, I was running out for my very first Mo Mondays in 2012, and I was all stressed about it, and I was late, of course. And my wife says, "Well, why are you even doing that? Like, what good is it going to bring? Is it going to make us money? Is it going to, whatever?" And like, is it? And I looked at her and I said, "I don't know. I don't know why I'm doing this." And yet, if I hadn't done Mo Mondays, I wouldn't have established myself as a expert in storytelling. I wouldn't have the credibility of the brand. We were in 16 cities, well, actually more, but 16 that I could remember, 16 cities across North America. From a branding perspective, I mean, it was like a total success. How many people were involved in it and subscribed to it? Um, it wouldn't have launched my speaking career as a storyteller or my coaching business as a storyteller and a speaking coach.
The reason I ask that question, I find that your answer fascinating because I've always sort of done that as well. That, you know, years ago, the big thing was goals, not goal setting, but you had to put down in writing, what do you want to accomplish in life? And I never was big into that because I kind of just wanted to do things as they happen, sort of sounds like you, and they just lead to other things without having a specific goal. And so it's just kind of a fun way to live my life that way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a satisfying way. The trick is to be able to identify when you're onto something. Like I'm not going to do it before I. Anyway, you could because you could keep. In fact, people have accused me. I say, Michel, you do too many things. And I say yes, but if you're able to take stock once in a while, periodically, and you say, this gives me joy, fulfills a passion, solves a problem in the world, and may have an opportunity to grow beyond just this little thing that I did, maybe I put a little bit more emphasis on that.
And one of the keys, as you're saying it, it's kind of what I try to do is I have to enjoy doing it, having fun doing it. Because if not, that's when I get out. I do something else. Michelle, let me ask you this. If folks want to track you down or find out more information about you, what's the best bet?
I've got 3 websites they could take a look at, depending on what they want. Uh, if they are interested in my music, you go to michelneray.music. Yes, there is a domain name called music, so michelneray.music. If they're interested in the professional side, which is my professional speaking, coaching, training, primarily in storytelling and core message development, you go to michelneray.com. And we've talked a fair bit about Mo Mondays, and if people are saying, "Oh, I want to help bring Mo Mondays to Asheville or wherever you are in the world," go to momondays.com. And Mo Mondays is momondays.com.
So I should ask you, and I'm sorry we didn't touch base, but what got you to the Asheville area?
Oh, family.
Okay.
And I love Asheville. I think Asheville is such a cool little city. It's just so I vibe with it. It's just so aligned with the energy. It as you said, you could tell storytelling is there. It's a quirky city. It's just a quirky, it's got a lot of character, and the people there have a lot of character, and I love that. And it's got mountains, and it's got rivers, and it's got music. It's great.
It's funny you said that because that's one of the reasons we got here is that my wife, some 20 years ago, punched in New Age, holistic, and spiritual. And that's what she was looking for. And at the time, Michelle, I wasn't into any of that stuff, but she loved it. And within a month, I found that Asheville had everything I like. So it's just a great area. Again, I'm sorry we missed you, but you said you have family here. Where's your family?
Yeah, we got family. They live up on the mountains,
Okay,
right
well,
on the Blue Ridge Trail, and yeah, it's
sure.
beautiful.
Well, next time you're in the area, hopefully we'll bump into each other, or next time I'm in
We'll make a point of it, Blaine. I'll give
Toronto.
you some notice.
Okay, likewise. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World podcast. I'd also like to thank my producer, Kim Jones. And like I said, my hope is that we'll actually bump into each other in real time one of these days. Thanks,
Thank
Michelle.
you, Blaine. Take care.